Hear me, Patrick Macnee.
Yes, Clive James, I can hear you.
Patrick, you're looking absolutely wonderful. In fact, you haven't changed a bit since you were John Steed.
No, what you're basically saying is, my God, that man's still alive. Now, coming from Australia, you're naturally full of the most wonderful blarney. I shall be 70 years old in 4 months' time, and God bless you for saying it, but we have the Avengers on in the house at this very moment. It comes on twice a day. And looking at myself 30 years ago, my goodness.
Do you think the success of the Avengers in the 60s had something to do with the style of it, the look of it? It was like a glossy magazine to look at.
Well, it was, but strangely enough, there was content. It was overlooked at the time, and people said it's not as funny as the commercials. But in fact, the show, yes. What is style, for goodness sake? It's just a way of living and way of attitude, I think. And it was exciting, and we progressed into sort of little areas. We got ourselves shrunk down to tiny people. We did strange things. We used computers. We used robot men way before robots were even thought of in factories. They're used everywhere now. And a lot of those in fact, we were Aquarians. We were ahead of our time, but just ahead. And we entertained people. It was fun.
And maybe the 60s has come back again, do you think?
Well, as you know, the 60s has definitely come back in style. We're a big hit now in Paris for some reason or another, because the whole styles have gone back to miniskirts. In fact, Di Rigg started miniskirts. And when we came to the United States first to sell the Avengers, they said, you can't go in those skirts, it's disgusting. So she did, and everybody loved it.
Did the French really understand your bowler hat and all that stuff?
No, they call it chapeau melon et bottes de cuir. How can you change a title called the Avengers, chapeau melon et bottes de cuir, and understand it? It's like Joan Collins paying Noel Coward. No, I shouldn't have said that.
There was an awful lot of leather in the Avengers, wasn't there?
What do you mean by an awful lot of leather? Enough to carpet a room?
In the sense that it was, some people might almost accuse it of being slightly, shall we say, fetishist?
Well, I think it's very important to indulge one's fetishes. I mean, if you acknowledge what they are, I used to love leather. I mean, there's nothing more delightful than leather, tightly encased in the female form, slightly oiled with a certain sort of special...
There's quite a lot of emphasis on being tied up, as I remember.
Well, bondage is good, too. I mean, you and I don't go in for that sort of thing, but for people who do, I mean, think what a wonderful time they have. Di Rigg was on the railway line, hanging from the rafters, on a horse, which she'd never ridden before in her life. They liked to see, or did like to see, women in great stages of undress and confinement. Now, of course, they've broken through it, and they're managing all the banks. They're managing... I'm employed by women constantly now.
Was any of that kinky stuff your idea?
Now, you see, I will not be pinned down like that. You are 6,000 miles away, and of course... I mean, no. What I'm saying is that at that time, I was excited and lustful and in my 30s, and naturally, everything that turned me on, I thought would probably turn the public on. And to my astonishment, it did.
Steve's relationship with these leading ladies, these leather-clad lovelies, it seemed a bit distant and yet somehow intimate. What was exactly going on?
Do you know, someone asked me once whether I'd ever consummated my relationship, and I thought, my goodness, somebody else I remember once asked me if I was celibate. And you know when you suddenly are asked a question like that, you think, what the hell does that word mean? But basically, I would have said almost constantly, but in his spare time, because I think without sexual activity, life is not worth living.
Steed was a big hit, and it must have been hard to shake his ghost afterwards. Have you ever resented him?
Hardly. If you spent 20 years before that in the hinterland, I worked in Hollywood in the 50s, you know. I'd been over here. I emigrated over here years, way before you were born. And the point is that if you've been unsuccessful for 20 years, when suddenly somebody says, here's your full plate, isn't it lovely, everybody recognizes you in the street, and you're doing a good show and you meet the best girls, what more can you ask?
Patrick, the day's obviously a scorcher and getting hotter all the time. It's a wonder you can bear to come out of doors at all. How do you stay cool?
Tiffany, would you mind turning on the outside air conditioning? Now, have a look at that. Do you not see all that lovely haze there? It's like a foggy day in London. Now, behind that, that comes through at 200 pounds a second, and underneath that, the temperature goes from 125 in the shade down to 87. It's quite extraordinary. I can sit in there and have a cup of tea and talk to my friends.
You're obviously living in really primitive frontier conditions. Patrick, we have to sign off now. What happened to John Steed in the end?
Well, you probably didn't see the episode, but Linda Thorson, who's a darling, wonderful girl, she and I got into some form of space rocket, and by mistake she said, now watch it, and she pressed a thing, and the whole thing went straight up into infinity. And that's where, hopefully, we still are. In fact, you probably see me circling over the BBC at this very moment.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, Patrick Macnee. It's time for our unique BBC commercial break, designed to raise tax revenue to fund government assistance for start-up accountancy businesses to act as official receivers for bankrupt small businesses. Recently, there was a Japanese commercial for a car that didn't show the car. But usually, advertisers find it safer to show the product in the commercial. Even safer is to demonstrate the product in use. Allow us to demonstrate.
El Volkswagen, simple y sencillamente la mejor compra.
One at a time, please.